second Ptolemy fulfilled the wishes of his father and Alexander the Great, and the Library of Alexandria flourished in the 3rd century BC. Ptolemy II ruled with his sister, and under their reign, the library and museum grew and prospered. It was the golden age of Alexandria. Besides expanding the library and museum, Ptolemy II built the last of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, a mammoth lighthouse on the island of Pharos. Today, the foundation of the ancient lighthouse is buried beneath this comparatively modern Islamic structure, the military fort Qayed Bey. But in Ptolemaic times, travelers to Alexandria viewed the first architecturally designed lighthouse in history, a 3-tiered marvel of construction over 400 feet tall. It took vast amounts of fuel to fire up the lighthouse. The ancients may have burned animal dung to send a powerful beacon of welcome out to the world from Alexandria. Sailors guided by the lighthouse were drawn into the library. What treasures would they find in its bounty of scrolls?
The history of Egypt would be typical of the kind of thing that would be in the library. Histories and records and literature would be an example of the kind of records necessary for a scholar to do research with. The difficulty was, of course, that there were 2 languages involved, Egyptian and Greek, but the basic language of the libraries was almost completely Greek, for this was a Greek ruler, a Greek court, a Greek culture imposed on the incredibly old civilization of Egypt.
The library was a storehouse for all types of literature. All the great Greek philosophers must have been represented, including the writings of Diogenes. Diogenes had been inspired by a young peasant to live in simplicity. Like the young man, Diogenes even discarded his drinking cup in favor of using just his hands. Diogenes then stripped himself of all worldly goods. He gathered a group of like-minded thinkers known as the Cynics, and documented their critical views of ancient Greek society. Diogenes believed that no man could be trusted. Legend tells us of his lifelong, unsuccessful search for an honest man. Diogenes looked all over town in broad daylight with a lantern to prove his cynical point. The philosophy of Diogenes the Cynic was but a fraction of the library's immense collection.
The library in Alexandria was really unique in an important way. It was eclectic. They wanted everything. It wasn't just Greek culture that they were collecting. They wanted Babylonian texts. They wanted Turkish texts. They wanted everything they could get. They wanted the Hebrew Bible.
Were parts of the Bible written at Alexandria? According to legend, the earliest Greek translation of the Old Testament was written in Alexandria under the guidance of Ptolemy II. He is said to have requested 70 Jewish scholars to simultaneously translate and copy the Hebrew books of law.
The text was in Hebrew, but in Alexandria there was a great and very large Jewish community. It seemed that that community was very quickly Hellenized, and that Hebrew was no longer comprehensible to them. So a Greek version was required, and it was made in Alexandria.
Named for the number of scholars who copied it, the Septuagint made the Old Testament text accessible to a wide range of people and formed the basis for countless other translations of the Bible. The Bible and all of the books in those ancient times were written on papyrus scrolls. The word paper comes from the Egyptian papyrus, the plant from which scrolls were made. Papyrus grew along the banks of the Nile. The ancients pressed wet strips of reeds side by side. They were pounded flat, and when dry, could be written on with early pen and ink.
It took a long time for a scribe to finish a book, and I don't think they looked on labor, of course, the way we do. We would go crazy trying to copy another book in longhand on papyrus, but it was a famous profession, and some scribes rose to be important people. Of course, in those days, to be able to read and write was almost magical.
Astrology and astronomy were popular sciences throughout the existence of the library in Alexandria. Many ancients believed in the influence of the stars and planets on daily life.
The belief was, of course, that as above, so below. What happened in the heavens influenced what was on Earth. So astrology was part of astronomy, and astronomers were astrologers, and astrologers were astronomers. In order to predict what happened on Earth, you had to accurately observe what happened above.
In Alexandria, Aristarchus first figured out that the Earth revolves around a stationary sun. About 100 years later, Hipparchus was the first to chart over 1,000 individual stars. He even figured out the length of the solar year, correct to within 7 minutes.
The library must have been an exciting place to be at. I mean, this was the closest you had to a government grant, where you could just do what you wanted to do and be supported. In the air was the sense that study everything for its own sake and just try to put everything together for figuring out the mysteries of the universe.
Even as scholars in Alexandria solved the mysteries of the universe, the Romans were encroaching on the East. Would this royally funded oasis of knowledge survive in a rapidly changing world?